I'm trying to acknowledge the people online. I usually don't, so I'm trying to include you. Several weeks ago, my son's car broke down. Nothing new at my house. If you notice and you go by my house, we live next to a graveyard. So it makes sense that our driveway is pretty much a graveyard for cars, because we have like 6 of them and 2 of them don't work. That's the way it is. But we hadn't counted on his car to break down. And the mechanic told us it wasn't worth the money to fix it. It wasn't something we were planning on. And fortunately, after less than a week, my son Jesse had somebody come into his restaurant and let his boss know, hey, look, I'm selling this car for $4,000, but you know somebody that could really use it, I'll give it to him for $2,000. So I went up to Cold Spring and looked at it, looked great. High mileage is pretty much a foregone conclusion if you're buying a used car and you live in the Anderson family. And so the fact that she was giving it to us for $2,000 was a steal, and then she threw in 4 winter tires and rims. So I'm thinking, wow, at $1,000 we got a replacement. To me, it was God's hand on the whole thing. He just provided. But here's the problem. It was an interruption. It was something that we weren't planning on. It was something that we couldn't control, and suddenly it was in our laps. And for that week, we're sitting there going, what are we going to do? Because we have to get kids to work. We have to get to... Interruptions, big or small, are a daily part of our life. Last week I said I usually don't handle interruptions too well. And I'm sure probably some of you are in that same boat. Often there's some frustration and some anger. And I said that often that's the way I'm feeling on the inside. I don't show it on the outside. Unless you happen to live with me, then you know I do. But I'm pretty good about faking it. But that is life, interruptions. Last week I said small frustrations and interruptions, as well as the big ones, give us opportunities to rely on God. And although these interruptions are unexpected and they catch us off guard, one of the things that I said last week is they never catch God off guard. They're not random. They're not meaningless events. In fact, interruptions are divinely placed in our path for a very specific reason, and God uses these interruptions to change us and make us more like Jesus. I said that most of us, we're not going to be called to build an ark or to take our only child up to a mountain and sacrifice him or her. Rather, it's these small daily interruptions, these little things that happen continually in our life, where we are given these unique opportunities to rely on God, to obey God, and to bring Him glory in how we handle our daily interruptions, the small interruptions. Last week we talked about the big ones. This week, the daily ones. The ones that happen every day. I quoted Paul Tripp last week. He said that you and I don't live in a series of big dramatic moments. We don't careen from big decision to big decision. We live in an endless series of little moments. The character of a life isn't set in 10 big moments. The character of a life is set in 10,000 little moments of every day. It's the themes of struggles that emerge from these little moments that reveal what's really going on in our hearts. The small interruptions, the small moments throughout our day when things don't go our way, when our plans fail, when our lives are interrupted. It's in these moments where the rubber meets the road. And that is where our faith is stretched, if we allow it to be. In those moments, do we really believe that God is in control of all the details of our life? Do we really buy into that? Do we really believe that His grace is sufficient to get us through the day? Do we really believe that Christ is enough? In those small moments, that's what begins to happen. Those questions, those interruptions, they force us to work through those questions. They make us face ourselves. They are God's way of taking off our blinders and allowing us to see Him and to see how much we need Him every day. They reveal the truth of what's really in our hearts. These interruptions remind us that we don't have life figured out, that we can't do it on our own. And last week I said Christ cares more about our transformation than He does our daily comfort. I used the acrostic, refocus, and that we covered R-E and F last week. I'm going to focus back on faith again today, but the re was refocus, because a lot of us, it's not that we have not focused on Christ in the past, it's that with these interruptions that have entered our lives, we've gotten our alignment a little bit out of sync. And we need to refocus, and we need to refocus on Christ. We need to refocus on the fact that He is the Lord of the interruptions. Chances are, we've all heard the story of Jesus calming the storm. At least in 3 of the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we read a similar story. Could be the same storm. Mark chapter 6, verses 47 to 52. John chapter 6, verses 16 to 21. And Luke chapter 8. Very often you'll read the same story in different Gospels, and there'll be slight differences. Same storm, different way of putting it. And I think it's an introduction into the interruptions of our life, because they do come like a storm. I've owned a boat since before I was married, and my wife and I had come to enjoy it for the last 25 years. And just until a couple months ago when we had to sell it, it was a sacrifice, but since we had no SUV that could tow it anymore, it made logical sense to get rid of it, since it would be sitting in the driveway. I've come to understand and respect the Hudson River after spending so much time on it. And I've encountered calm water, I've encountered the big waves. Often, I can remember a time in the past where I had my kids in the boat, and I was in the boat, and the waves were coming over the bow, and I was nervous. I didn't let Margaret really know how nervous I actually was, but I was scared. I'm thinking, we're not going to make, and this is the river. So you wouldn't think that it would be like an ocean, but it is. I think in today's passage, the disciples, they had to encounter the storm that popped up out of nowhere, kind of like the interruptions in our life. Luke chapter 8, verse 22, it says, one day Jesus said to his disciples, let's go over to the other side of the lake. So they got in the boat and they set out. That's what they did, right? That was their occupation. They were sailors. They were professionals when it came to handling a boat. They were like my friend Rob, who visited church a while back, and he's a licensed captain. He knows how to handle the water. He knows how to handle a boat. And he knows that when the sky looks this way or that way, that he needs to get into shore because the storm is coming. That's what they do. They're seasoned. They know. And that's what these guys were. And then the unexpected happened. They found themselves in the midst of some of the toughest weather and water that they ever faced. And they're wondering, seasoned sailors, they're wondering if they're going to make it. They were afraid. These are pros, and they were afraid that something was really going to go wrong. And in verse 23, it says, as they sailed, a squall came down the lake. A squall, it's a little word for a big wind. A real big wind. I mean, it's kind of like if you've ever seen a hawk or an eagle drop down and grab its prey. It's just like all of a sudden just drops out of the sky. You're startled. And that's kind of the way a squall was. Maybe it was like a white squall. It was that happened, a sudden burst of wind without the clouds, and it just comes out of nowhere. It's the kind of storm that struck down the Pride of Baltimore. It was a 137-foot sailboat, and it weighed 121 tons. And in May 1986, she was sailing about 240 miles north of Puerto Rico, and as one witness puts it, a tremendous whistling sound. It roared through the rigging of the ship, and it hit the ship with literally, they said, a force of a cannon. This is wind. And it took the whole boat and flipped it over. And then a 20-foot wave hit them. And they said the Pride of Baltimore sank in a matter of minutes. Water can be dangerous. Wind can be dangerous. It can cost you your life, and it hits unexpectedly at times. And that was the kind of thing that fell upon these disciples in this little sailboat that they had. And I'm sure that they were aware of what everything looked like. Okay, John, you see over there, if that cloud comes a little bit, let's. They knew what they were doing. They knew the signs. And that's what you do when you are in trouble, in times of trouble, when you're dealing with interruptions. You can see things that are approaching. You can make plans for it. But see, the problem is that a lot of our interruptions come from nowhere. I wonder how long they've been fighting with this storm, these disciples. And then somebody scratches their head and says, hey, who's Jesus? And to their surprise, maybe dismay, they realized, Jesus, he's where he was in the beginning of the voyage. He's in the front. He's on the cushion. He's sound asleep. I mean, how do you suppose that these disciples reacted when they realized this? I mean, I don't know. Jesus, they're in a panic. And here's Jesus sound asleep. I don't know what was going through these disciples' minds, but my comment would have been, Jesus, why are you asleep at a time like this? Don't you see we're going to die? This is serious stuff. Can you blame them? These are seasoned sailors. This is a huge, bad storm. We're going down. The ship is going down. But Jesus, he's just a totally different story. He doesn't jump to his feet like, we got to do something here. He doesn't demand to know, why didn't you get me up sooner? Why didn't you wake me up? Why'd you let it get so bad? And I'm guessing here, I can almost picture Jesus getting up and, I'm this kind of stretch. Yeah, so what's the deal, guys? And he doesn't yell. He doesn't yell. He just speaks. And not just to the wind and the waters, but also to the disciples. And the effect upon the storm is immediate. Jesus rebukes the wind and it grows quiet. He speaks to these churning waters and suddenly they're calm. But there's like a different kind of storm that's now brewing in the hearts of these disciples. And Jesus asks them a very poignant question. He looks at them and he says, where's your faith? Where's your faith? And they reply with a question of their own. One of the disciples says, who is this? Who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him. But let's go back to that first question posed by Jesus. Where is your faith? And he asked that disciples, and I want to answer that back. What do you... If I was one of them, I'd be like, what do you mean, Jesus, where is my faith? I mean, the ship's sinking here. We're in a storm. We haven't learned to walk on water yet. You didn't give us that lesson quite yet, By the way, Jesus, where were you when you were asleep? What would have happened if we went down, Jesus? But I think their question opens up a lot of their hearts. Who is this man that he commands even the winds and water to obey him? Why are they so surprised? Why does it cause them to wonder so much? One poll is Jesus' question, where is your faith? And then the other one is, we're shocked. We're shocked. I don't know. Why did Jesus ask that question, where is your faith? What could that mean? I don't know. Maybe he was a bit grumpy. Hey, he was in a good nap and he got woke up, right? You know how sometimes people are like that when you wake them up. Why'd you wake me up? I don't know. Was he upset with them a little bit, and that's why he said, "Where's your faith?" Maybe Jesus felt like the disciples were overacting a little bit. We know people like that, right? That they overreact. They're convinced that every cloud and every wind is a hurricane. There's not really any small problems for those kind of people. Every setback is a tragedy. Every tiny problem is a disaster. And they often are worried and exhaust themselves thinking about all the things that are going to happen that will never happen. But verse 23 in Luke, it says that the boat was being swamped. The waves were crashing over the side. Verse 24, it says that the waters were raging. So this ship was in trouble, serious trouble. And I don't know, where is your faith? Maybe Jesus is rebuking them for their lack of confidence. Maybe Jesus asked this question, and what he really means is, Guys, do you have any faith in yourself? Do you wonder, maybe he's chiding them for coming to him instead of taking some action? And we know people like that, right? They kind of spiritualize everything. No matter what the problem, their solution is the same. Let's pray about it. And don't misunderstand me here. Prayer is a good thing, and our conversation with Christ should be involved with everything that we do, no doubt. And most of us, we could do a lot better job in our prayer life. But there are some situations where the most spiritual thing you can do is take some sensible action. The house is on fire. Let's pray about it, see what we should do. No! Go get some water. Call the fire department. Do you know what I mean? You know where I'm getting at with that? Maybe Jesus was simply trying to urge these disciples to take some action. Don't just stand there, guys. Why are you calling me? Bail. Tend to the sails. Start getting the water out of the boat. Maybe Jesus was trying to say to them, do what you can do first, and then come over and cry to me. But that really doesn't fit who Jesus was. And the problem here was really a problem of faith, not effort. Again, these are not recreational boaters. They're fishermen. They spent their careers on the water. And they said in verse 23, they were in great danger. So it's implied in Jesus' question. What does he mean when he says, where is your faith? I think Jesus is partly responding to their question, and maybe he's reading into it, that they thought he was asleep at the wheel. Because they said, who is this man? He commands the winds and the water, and they obey him. It's so easy for us to read that and sit there and say, disciples, really? You've seen him do how many miracles, and you're shocked? But we know the end of the story. We've read it. This is these guys in the middle of this great interruption. And Jesus says, where is your faith? And I think he says that to us when we have our interruptions, big and especially small ones. And I think he backs up and he says, where's your faith? Do you really believe I am who I said I am? Act like it. Where's your faith? Some of us, to be honest, we're not entirely convinced that Jesus is going to bail us out of things. And we know that the story doesn't always end that way. Jesus doesn't always speak to the wind and waves and calm things down. Sometimes he gives us wind for our sails to get us through the storm, right? Sometimes he doesn't remove us from it. But see, his question is the same to us. Where is your faith? And I don't think what he's looking for is for us to say, who is this man? That the waves and the water, everything will. I just think he's scratching his head saying, how long does it take, guys? How many times did he say that to the disciples? How long have I been with you, and you're still not getting it? A lot of us, we kind of go through our lives and we have this uncertainty. We're on a course. Maybe we've changed jobs. gone into a new ministry. We've sold our house, moving. And you know, we kind of get misaligned. Sometimes I feel a struggle when I have a day off because I don't get up and have my normal devotions that morning because my timing is off. Do you know what I mean? And I struggle a little bit. There's some waves and wind and unexpected problems, interruptions arise, and I forget that God is still with me, and I enter into this interruption, and I'm disturbed by it, and I feel like I hear His quiet voice loud in my heart. Where's your faith? Do you really trust me, Dave? Because if you really trusted me, you wouldn't be worried like you are. If you really trusted me, Dave, you wouldn't be trying to deal with this whole situation on your own. Martin Lloyd-Jones, pastor and author, and great man of the past, he said this in his book, Spiritual Depression. He says, God permits storms. He permits difficulties. He permits the winds to blow and the billows to roll, and everything may seem to be going wrong, and we ourselves to be in jeopardy. God's guidance in our lives, as I said, does not always steer us away from the storm. Sometimes He chooses to send us in to the storm. Because we need an interruption. Because we've been misaligned. Because we needed to be adjusted. And that's the time that we need to engage our faith and say, Jesus, you set the course. I don't. Sometimes God seems distant. Sometimes He seems to be asleep at the wheel. Sometimes we don't feel He comes through because we judge things from our perspective. And in that painful silence, that's where that question from Jesus should resonate in our minds. Where is your faith? Oswald Chambers, he wrote, when he talks about the meaning of prayer, he said, is that prayer is that we get a hold of God, not the answer. We look for visions from heaven, for earthquakes and thunders of God's power. The fact that we are dejected proves that we do. And we never dream that all the time God is in the commonplace things and people around us. We pray to get a hold of God, not for the answer. We pray to be in sync with Him. His will. A guy by the name of Henry Drummond, he said that Christ's life outwardly was one of the most troubled lives that has ever lived. Tempest and tumult and tempest, the waves breaking over it all the time. But the inner life was a sea of glass. The great calm was always there. Christ's ability to sleep in the midst of a storm helps us to see a new dimension to the peace of God. We usually think of the peace of God primarily as something we experience. We think of a peace that we receive, the peace that passes all understanding, but our experience of peace must ultimately have its origin in God's own peace. God is not anxious. God is not afraid. God is certain of the future. The wind and waves that are so troubling to us cannot reach him. Though he may be removed from them, he is not unmoved by them. So again, I go back to the big question, and that is, in refocus. Refocus our attention and faith. We touched on it last week. I want to touch on it again. Faith. Where is your faith? Interruptions will come. Some of them big, some of them small. And when they do, we have to put ourselves in that boat and say, I'm going to trust you. Why? Why would Jesus say that to them, except the fact he was trying to let them know, guys, it's time to wake up. It's time to understand who's in the boat with you. Where's your faith? And I think that's what he says to us, especially in our interruptions. Where's your faith? Where is it? And it might be a scary thing to step back and say, all right, God. I'm sure it wasn't an easy thing for Peter to walk on water. But he took that step trusting. God doesn't tell us that we're not going to have fears, that we're not going to be scared. He just says, trust. And take those steps, even if it is scary. Where's your faith? Trust. And I think the more we get out of the boat and walk on the water, the more confident we'll become in the God that we serve. And those little interruptions will be little speed bumps in our life. We get a chance to celebrate this each and every week when we come to communion. Christ died so we could have a relationship with God. He came so that we could be connected with him. He came so that we could have this relationship, this amazing relationship, and be in the midst of a storm and be confident that he's going to get us through those times. We can have that. And we celebrate it each and every week. It's only because he was willing to die on the cross for us. So as we think about the interruptions in our life, and we think about Jesus and this storm that maybe you're dealing with right now, let's remember that everything was done at the cross so that we could have this wonderful relationship with him and experience it no matter what the storms are. Let me close in a word of prayer and thank our guys come up and just Ellen. Father, I just thank you for your word. I pray as we dwell on these disciples in the storm, Father, I pray that the same question that you asked them would ring in our ears. Where is your faith? And I pray, Father, that you would give us a strong answer for that. I pray that we would trust in ways that we haven't trusted before. I pray that we'll stop trying to do things on our own. And the things that we don't understand, we will leave in your hands. So, Father, I pray that you would do above and beyond anything we can imagine or dream in our lives and through our lives.